All right. Hello, everyone. We are at the top of the hour and we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here with us on the third day of the Gale Conference. My name is Erin Owens. I'll be the moderator for this session titled Evaluating Primo Research Assistant. I'm really excited about this one. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping reminders. We do have a code of conduct that we'll be enforcing for this conference. I'm putting a link in the chat to that code of conduct, as well as the email address that you can contact if you experience any issues with conduct, which we certainly hope you won't, but please let us know. The session is being recorded. You can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. Your microphones are muted. If you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A box, and I'll be keeping up with those, and we will address them at the end of the session. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Darren Hall is a Systems Technical Services Librarian at Citrus College in Glendora, California. He serves as co-lead of the DEIAA work group of the LSP program of the California Community Colleges. Allie Jordan is an instructional librarian at Southwestern Community College in Chula Vista, California. She serves as the lead of the instruction work group of the LSP program of the California Community Colleges. Please join me in welcoming Darren and Allie.
Thank you, everyone. I am really happy to be here and have you joining us. Getting an echo here. Sorry. So yeah, thank you, Erin, for that introduction and for everyone for joining us today. And you should now see my screen, I hope. This is our title slide. I won't reintroduce us, just draw your attention to the fact that we have here our email addresses, and if you have any questions after the presentation that we don't address in the Q&A portion, do feel free to reach out to us. We enjoy hearing from you. Keep the conversation going. So for today's session, we are going to start with a little poll and ask folks whether or not they're using Primo Research Assistant at your institutions. We'll talk a little bit about some of the literature that informed our own project here. And then we'll get into some of the background of the project, the goals, and the process that we undertook. Then we'll talk some about the results and our analysis. And at the end, we should have plenty of time for questions. And maybe that will also just lead to a bit of discussion. But let's go ahead and start off with a poll. I'm going to launch that now. And just go ahead and, put in your response to what is the status of Primo Research Assistant at your institution. And as those results are coming in, let me just give you a little bit of a background about Primo Research Assistant. I'll often just abbreviate it to PRA. It is a opt-in generative AI tool that is part of the Primo Discovery service. It uses a form of AI called Retrieval Augmented Generation AI, which is also known as RAG AI. And what this means is that the generated content that it kind of shows back to the user is based on the content of the sources it has already retrieved. And that is designed to help avoid confabulations and hallucinations, one of those sort of primary concerns folks have had with AI in general. It is when a user or patron puts in a natural language query, it translates that query into a Boolean OR search, and then searches the Primo or the Ex Libris Central Discovery Index to get its results. And then it narrows that down to a sort of top 5 results that, as you can see from the image on the slide, are listed. The citations are listed at the top. And then it generates an overview of those sources in that's the generative AI portion of it. And that is then based on the abstracts of those top 5 sources. So, and that is also, it gives sort of inline references to the sources in its overview. A note about the Ex Libris Central Discovery Index, that contains some 2 billion items, but PRA excludes certain content formats, including like news and videos. And it also excludes certain publishers and or aggregators, so folks that they couldn't strike deals with, I gather, such as Elsevier and JSTOR. But at the same time, because the CDI is so comprehensive, it will, in its results, often include resources that your library may not have access to. So we will undoubtedly come back to that a little later. I'm going to end the poll now and see what our results are, sharing the results. Let's take a look. I hope folks are able to see the results.
I believe so. I think they should be showing. I can see it.
Yeah, you can see it. Okay, great. So pretty interesting. There are, in fact, a few folks who were not familiar with what Primo Research Assistant is. So hopefully that little introduction gave you a bit of a sense. A few folks who have already enabled it for all patrons, and most folks have not enabled it and are either testing internally or not even really begun to explore it yet. But nobody seeming to have just released it for selected patron categories. So very interesting, and certainly something we can return to at the Q&A portion. So I'd like to hear more, especially from folks who have enabled it for all patrons and for those of you who are testing it. I'm going to stop sharing now that poll and we'll move on. So a little bit of background here. The literature on AI is, of course, like the field itself, emergent and burgeoning. And some of the works that most inform this study include Archambault's and Rincon's article that introduces the REACT framework for evaluating AI tools for research, which they also actually happened to present at this conference last year. REACT stands for relevancy, ease of use, accessing DEIA, currency, transparency, and accuracy. And it's essentially a rubric, and we'll take a look at some of the other rubrics examples in just a bit. The problem of implicit bias in AI is one that is discussed frequently, and Nair and Rodriguez are specifically interested in that problem as it manifests in academic library tools. They argue that including librarians in the development process can help mitigate such bias, though not eliminate it. Tay's blog post provides an excellent background on PRA generally, as well as going into some detail about its use of retrieval augmented generation. And here we are introduced to the mechanics of how PRA works, which is what I summarized basically in the previous slide. Lastly, after conducting our own survey, we actually learned about a similar study that was conducted by librarians at UC San Diego, which they recently presented at the LOEX conference in Pasadena, California. Notably, they appear to have reached a similar conclusion that our survey respondents did, namely that PRA may not be ready for prime time yet. So I'm going to turn it over now to Allie to give us a little bit of background into the project itself.
Yeah, so I'm want to give a little bit of context and background for our project that we did, starting with the California Community College System, for those of you who are not familiar. The California Community College System, or CCCs, serve around 2.1 million students across 116 campuses across the state. This is the largest system of higher education in the country. And all CCC libraries and library staff, librarians, are supported by the Community College League of California and the Council of Chief Librarians. These also have oversight from the CCC Chancellor's Office. And these organizations provide a lot of benefit to the CCC libraries, most notably consortial purchasing. We get a great assist. They get us some great pricing on our subscriptions. They also provide professional development to librarians and library staff, general leadership in the field of librarianship across the CCCs, as well as advocacy at the lobbying level. And the most recent development is the Library Services Platform, or LSP program. In 2020, the LSP program was initiated to provide support with implementation of Alma Primo statewide. The entire CCC system adopted Alma Primo, and the LSP program was initiated to help that transition. As of now, 110 out of 116 CCCs are participating. Within this program, each participating college has local control over functional aspects of their own platform, while the LSP program provides shared opportunities for cataloging, e-resource data, and other back-end development. This is extremely important because CCC libraries vary vastly in size. We have small colleges, medium colleges, and large colleges. Small colleges sometimes can have maybe one full-time librarian and a handful of support staff that may or may not be full-time. So the LSP program does a lot of heavy lifting and assisting and support for these colleges that don't have a lot of people power behind them. And we also can get together and share our own experiences from our own unique perspectives as CCC libraries. This program is still ongoing, and with the help of a handful of dedicated staff and dozens of volunteers across CCC libraries, as well as a representative from Ex Libris, this program is still providing backup and support for those 110 participating colleges. This work gets done through work groups largely. That are topical, as you see here: discovery, UX, systems, instruction, and so on. And that support goes into, again, supporting the LSP operations, best practices, policies, and also shared costs. So I know there's probably a lot of consortiums across the country, but this one is quite large and provides a ton of support for all those participating colleges. So this is the kind of the framework where our PRA assessment project began. So the initial concept and collaboration formed shortly after PRA was released in September of 2024, which was a little ahead of schedule. We kind of were operating under the assumption it would be released in December, but it was all of a sudden upon us in September. So it pushed our timeline up a bit. But it was a collaboration that came out of the instruction and DEIA work groups. And to kind of focus the project, we developed two kind of core goals. For the initial assessment, we limited participation to library faculty and staff who actively engage with Primo. And we wanted their feedback on these kind of four core areas of concern. So user experience, how well PRA works, implicit bias, how how well does it actually do what it says it's going to do, and also the pedagogical value. So is this, from an instruction perspective, how is this going to change how we teach search and discovery, how we teach Primo? And again, these and also provide information that the member colleges of LSP program can use when considering implementing PRA. Because again, there's some very small colleges that don't necessarily have the time to invest in exploring this resource, figuring it out, and deciding and making that final decision and developing their practice around it. So these are the kind of the core goals that we started out with. To achieve this, we created our own rubric to assess PRA across a number of categories, which Darren will discuss in more detail shortly. We then sent out a call for participation to the LSP program listserv, because again, we were at this point focusing primarily on practitioners, people who are actively engaged with Primo. Volunteers, both library faculty and support staff, received a brief training in March about the rubric. This was not a full norming process, but just kind of an overview, answering questions about how this study would be done. And then they completed their assessments in mid-April. So this was a pretty ambitious timeline. We did want to kind of conclude this work in the academic year. And again, Darren will talk a little bit more about that rubric and the process and the kind of particulars of that rubric.
Yeah, so here you can see our rubric categories and the individual criterion. The project team members did an environmental scan of rubrics being used to assess AI products, both generally and in libraries specifically. And prior to launching our survey, we did not find any studies specifically used for the assessment of PRA, which kind of further reinforced our sense that our own work in this area was needed and of potential value. And as mentioned, the React framework from Archambault and Rincon was one such rubric that we came across. And we also found rubrics from Rutgers and McMaster University libraries helpful. And we used these resources along with the SUNY AI guide to develop our own rubric with the 21 criteria across 5 categories you see here, and then some summative conclusions. So, you know, for example, you take like the sources category here, we were focusing on the actual cited sources, the 5 that were listed at the top. And, you know, we wanted to assess things like the access, the currency, the relevance. In the area of output, we were looking specifically at that generated AI text that comes back, the summary overview, and asking questions about, you know, accuracy, clarity and context, bias, cultural sensitivity, things like that. In terms of functionality, you get to issues of, you know, what are the bells and whistles that are available for users. User experience, of course, we wanted to know about accessibility, ease of use, questions about privacy. And then, of course, documentation. We are looking at the actual documentation provided by Ex Libris for users. How transparent is it? How visible is all of this to an end user? And then our conclusion category. You know, do you see benefits here? Does it sort of support the purpose that it says it is? And would you recommend it being implemented at your institution? So each criterion included a 3-point scale from works well, which we gave a 3, to serious concerns, which was scored with a 1. As sort of already suggested, we didn't do a norming process, which ideally we would have tried to do, but given our tight timeline and because of the logistics of trying to gather together a dispersed group of over 20 librarians in the middle of the semester, we opted to forego that effort. Excuse me. Interestingly, we subsequently learned that the UC San Diego team ran into their own challenges when trying to normalize their rubric. In any case, as such, we offer the results of our survey while recognizing the limitations presented by the possibility of higher inter-rater variability, increased biases, and compromised validity that can come with using a non-normalized rubric like this. To that extent, we consider these findings preliminary, but hopefully suggestive. So let's take a look at these results. Participants in our study were asked to query PRA 3 to 5 times. We weren't too prescriptive about that, on topics that they would have some familiarity with in order to evaluate the output. They were further instructed to try to phrase their queries in a manner typical of our students, but also to attempt to stress test the product by including a topic or two that had the potential to produce bias in the results. I think the rubric scores paint an interesting picture in as much as, if you look at the chart on the left, there appears to be, roughly speaking, a fair degree of satisfaction with most of the individual criteria, right? So in this chart on the left, we see most of the scores in the 2 to 3 range overall, and just a few criteria where the respondents had a preponderance of scores of 1 to 1.5 were not applicable, particularly in areas like refinement, in access a little bit there for sure, some of the functionality of saving, exporting, sharing, etc. But given that, even though most of those individual criteria had relatively higher satisfaction, we see on the right that in their conclusions, their overall analysis, half the respondents would not actually recommend enabling the tool at this point in time. And as I mentioned, this conclusion tracks with the final analysis that the study at UC San Diego did as well. So in addition to our to the rubric scores, we invited the participants to provide comments. And being good opinionated librarians, they commented a lot, which is great because this provided wonderful qualitative data to complement the quantitative rubric scores. And we used AI to help us pull out some common themes found in those comments, which you see distributed here in terms of the most problematic or concerning aspects on the left to the most positive on the right. Above all, as previously noted, since PRA relies on the CDA for the output, this leads to a situation where sources may not be available locally. This is especially the case for resource-poor institutions, which is often the case for community colleges. And, you know, it's worth noting that the experience at an R1 institution may be very different in this regard. In some cases, of course, patrons may have the ability to request such items via ILL, but that's not true at all of our institutions. And even where it is available, it's often not something students are familiar or comfortable with using. We also saw a pattern of comments suggesting people thought there was real potential for PRA, but this was coupled with the sense that it's just not quite there yet. I think this is very likely related to the problems articulated with the access to sources or lack thereof. In the more middle of the range, respondents comments varied in their assessment of the functionality and the user experience, with some quite pleased, but others expressing an uneven experience overall. Many respondents felt that PRA was a valuable tool for exploring a topic, but they wished it allowed for a dialogue between the patron and the AI, similar to other AI tools that we're all familiar with. And finally, and perhaps somewhat ironically, our respondents gave PRA praise for presenting high quality sources and very good summaries based on those sources. And I say ironic because, as noted, they were at the same time displeased with the all too common lack of access to those sources. So they were good ones if you could get to them. So as mentioned, these results are suggestive but preliminary. And in that light, we are considering our next steps. There is, among other things, an opportunity to do more analysis of the data we collected that might provide additional insight, specifically compensating for the limitations of using a non-normalized rubric. There's also, of course, good reason to expect that at some point in the future, Ex Libris will introduce newer versions of PRA. One improvement, of course, we heard loud and clear, for example, is the ability to customize the sources drawn from to only include locally available content. When a new version is released, I think we have a good opportunity to do another round of assessment that will build on our experience from this first round. And finally, the main purpose of the LSP, as mentioned, is to provide guidance to our member colleges. So this survey positions us well to work with member colleges who are thinking through whether to implement PRA locally. We did already present this to our member colleges in our weekly webinars that we do throughout the academic year, and we had a good turnout for that and some good feedback. But I could also see this extending into more one-on-one help if asked, and maybe we could help them as they think through the process, maybe do a focus group on their own campus or run their own rubric locally that's modified and for use with their faculty or students, things of that nature. So, and of course, to state sort of the obvious, for us, this study reaffirms the need for librarians to be continuing to analyze AI tools as they become ever more embedded in the process of research. So yeah, that was our experience. And thank you again, and we'd love to open up the floor now to any questions or to a discussion in general. I'll show here briefly too. So I think we're making all of these slide decks available, but references here for those of you who want to go back and read some of the things that informed our study. Please do that. But yeah, opening up the floor. Aaron.
Yeah, thank you so much, Darren and Allie. That was fascinating. We had a question asking if you had tested the option to view more results. Rebecca notes that she found the search it created to be rather bizarre,
Hmm.
with like selections of keywords joined with Boolean and really odd combinations. And I had noticed the same in some of our internal testing. So we were curious if y'all had any comments about that view more results.
Yeah. So yes, indeed. I found it interesting. We did not specifically guide our survey respondents to to dig into that. It was a little bit more like on their own. Like, are you gonna go there? Are you gonna click it and see what happens? Um, uh, so that wasn't really part of the uh, responses that we got or that was focused on in the rubric. But you're absolutely right. When you click on the view more results, you do get the full sort of takes you back to the Primo Discovery results kind of page, but you then see a little bit more transparently, well, how did it, design a query for this? You see the Boolean or, and indeed, yes, sometimes, of course, the terms that it's deciding on using for synonyms of whatever it pulled out of the natural language query could likely be a little odd. And I think on the one hand, that can obviously be problematic. At the same time, for a more experienced researcher, perhaps it provides you the transparency of what's happening at the back end a little bit more, and B, you could actually then take that query and massage it, refine it for your own, you know, you, what you think, oh, the AI got it wrong here. What I really meant was this, right? So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's excellent. We've had a request if you could put the references slide up
Oh,
again.
sure.
Um, and then Dan asked, could you share a little more about how you used AI to extract themes from your qualitative data, such as what systems did you use? How are the prompts structured?
Great question. Allie, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah,
Or
I just as a first pass, I used ChatGPT and asked just for a sentiment analysis and of each, I took each criterion separately and the comments for each criterion and asked for a sentiment analysis and pulled out some themes. We had a whole number of comments, but again, taking each criterion separately, I scanned through also on my own to not completely rely on the AI, but just to kind of compare what I could pull out. And it was very similar. It did a decent job. And I think Darren and one of our other team members used a different.
I used Perplexity in my instance. And if I recall correctly, I may have tried, because Perplexity allows you to choose which AI you're using. I think I kind of did a couple of them just to see, how much different it might be, whether I was using Chat GPT or Claude kind of stuff, or deep, and I think deep research too. So
then GPT did ask, do you want like a visual representation? So I was like, yeah, sure. I kind of used the full scope of what it was offering me. And again, it was alongside my own analysis. But it was helpful in kind of confirming, again, that kind of sentiment. Um,
And being able to do it a lot faster.
yes, much rather.
All right, fantastic. We've still got a little bit of time if anyone's got some more questions. You can either type them in the Q&A box, or if you prefer to speak aloud, just use the tool to raise your hand, and I will unmute you.
I'd love to hear from anybody who institution has actually already enabled PRA for their whole institution. What the experience has been for you. You know, how are patrons responding? How are librarians responding? How are you teaching? Incorporating it into instruction.
Yeah, absolutely. If we've
Because
got any enablers, feel free to raise your hand, add to the discussion. We do have a question here. They say, forgive me if I missed this, but did you also have students test the tool?
not
No,
in, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Allie.
not for this. We wanted we didn't quite have the time and space to do that. And we wanted to first tap our own colleagues around the CCCs to get that librarian perspective. And one of the, I would say one of my, a kind of a secret third goal of mine that was not listed was to kind of start the conversation of evaluating AI a little bit more critically. I think just from conversation, there was a lot of enthusiasm about PRA when it was first announced. This is going to be so great for our students. They're going to be able to, do such better research, and I was a little more skeptical. So I think this exercise served that purpose quite well, that kind of third unstated purpose of getting that conversation started. For my in my own evaluation, it is like Darren hinted at, maybe for a different like at a university, a different institution, this would be a much more robust tool. For community colleges, as our results showed, it's a little hit or miss. My very first search, I think I was suggested at least one dissertation, if not two, and that's simply not where our students are at. And you have to know to ask the tool to give you books, or you have to know enough to frame your question to get what you actually need. And as we know, students, beginning researchers, may not really know the full extent of what they need. So it was kind of a reality check, I think, for our own colleagues, to maybe take a step back and really understand the scope of what PRA offers and the implications of just kind of putting it out there and seeing what happens.
I'll just add, I know that one of our survey participants at their institution, actually prior to us doing this, they had done some internal testing, and the queries they used were actually drawn from chat reference queries. So that was a way of getting more sort of authentic, at least authentic student queries, if not the experience that the student then has when they, how would they interpret those results? Because then it was, I guess, the library staff and librarians who were doing the interpretation of the results. I think if I recall correctly, that's also a bit how the UC San Diego survey went. But maybe if any of those folks are here, they could speak to that. I guess one other interesting thing to note about that is, of course, that because it's AI and you put that query in, you can put the same query in multiple times and get a different output, right? So that makes it a little challenging too, in some ways, to have a kind of consistent analysis, if you will.
Yeah,
That was
that's a
also,
great point.
that was the problem I think that the San Diego folks had, UC San Diego folks had in trying to normalize the rubric, because everybody was getting different results.
Yeah.
So, if I may interject, I don't believe we have this in the slides, but in the chat, I put the link to our public Google Drive folder that has all the raw data and the rubrics, the summary analysis, and our presentation from our CCC webinar.
Wow.
So that way, folks can take a look at our documentation and see what we did.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Allie. That's fabulous. We've
I'm
gotten a couple.
sorry I didn't put it in the presentation.
No problem. We've gotten just a couple of comments. Robert said they have enabled it at UNCP and they're using it to help students craft better research questions. And then David adds on to that and says that he has his students do a reflective activity to evaluate the PRA. And overall, this past semester, the students have really valued it. Sonia notes that they also struggled with those changing results because they couldn't figure out how the natural language is being linked to the controlled vocabulary.
Yeah, I think from an instruction point of view, this was very eye-opening. Obviously, it is a teachable moment more than anything else. I think that it's a helpful tool, but students really do need to have it contextualized. The output that it provides, I also found if you don't really know, if you're just starting out and you're doing that kind of early exploratory phase of research, the output may not have enough context for a beginning researcher. So I think it is definitely something that's helpful, but it does need, for our population, kind of someone to guide a student to using it to its optimum level.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the critical context that's needed.
Yeah, well, and I would just add to the, like, it's an interesting tool. It could be a very interesting tool to use when sort of comparing and contrasting it to the popular generative AI tools like ChatGPT, etc. Right? So, and getting students to appreciate the differences there between how different AI tools might actually operate. So, that's just another way in which this could be used in instruction.
Excellent. I like that. Let's see. Rebecca asked, could you give some examples of topics that you were using to search when you were testing the bias?
I think we had some folks who used pretty loaded language on the top, like immigration, research topic about immigration, and
Palestine.
Palestine, yeah. So we asked them to kind of purposefully put in a question that had biased language, and their observation was that PRA kind of course corrected that into a more neutral, the output into a more neutral tone.
Very interesting.
Would you say that that's what you recall, Darren?
Yes, but at the same time, there were cases where I think in particular there was the case of, and this wasn't part of, this was, I think, from one of our respondents again, who they had tested internally at their campus prior, and it was a question about sort of the history of Palestine, and all of the results only focused on Israel-Palestinian kind of relations and history, and didn't have anything to do with anything prior to 1947 or something.
Rebecca notes that she's also used conspiracy theory topics for doing some bias testing. And
Ooh,
then
that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, Robert shares that he had his students search the PRA using just basic keywords, then look at the search string that the PRA used to help them generate other keywords to expand their search.
That's
kind of
cool.
like that idea of using it as a tool to then build your own better search. All right, well, I think we are at time. So everyone, please join me in thanking Darren and Allie. This was an absolutely wonderful presentation. I really appreciate you guys. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the Gale conference.
Thank you.
Thank you all.